shared. Alrighty, cool. Just give everyone 1 second to join. Alrighty, I will get going. Let me know if my screen does not proceed. It looks like everything looks set to go. So thank you guys so much for joining today. This is Fedmine's first joint webinar for 2022, and we're happy to be here with you today. We've got a discussion focused all around Cmmc 2.0 and looking forward to learning about that and the next phase of CMMC and what's changed and what's happening there. I'm happy to be joined today by Johnathan Lightfoot of Symbiont. He's going to take us through those changes and what we can do to prepare for that. Our discussion outline today is we're going to have introductions, a little bit about Fedmine, and then our presentation. We will be sending out the recording and the slides following today's webinar. Please just submit any questions that you have in the Q&A box, and we'll make sure to get to them after Johnathan's presentation. So a little about Fedmine. We were founded in 2004. We're a business intelligence platform that analyzes and simplifies the increasingly complex federal business landscape in real time. We provide our clients the visibility that they need into their addressable market of business opportunities. And most recently, Fedmine is a part of GovSpend. As of last summer, the GovSpend is the largest provider of purchase orders within the SLED, state, local, and education industry. Fedmine integrates our data from 18 different data sets, and it's all done by our back-end technology. Some of our primary sources you can see on the screen, sam.gov, as well as USA Spending for our subcontractor data. In Fedmine, you'll often see the prime award connected to the sub at the task order level, with the original solicitation also linked. Our main clientele are government contractors, both large and small, prime and sub, but really anyone who has a need for federal spending and opportunity data can use Fedmine. This includes federal agencies, PTAC organizations, and other support firms. You can monitor federal spending, build a pipeline of recompete and newly forecasted opportunities, dissect your competition, and quickly view agency profiles in Fedmine. Happy to introduce Johnathan Lightfoot today. He's a Navy veteran from South Florida, but he's joining us today from San Antonio, Texas. Johnathan leads the IT services at Symbiont. He holds his CMMC certification and also focuses his time consulting and developing new business. When he's not in the office, you can find him hosting and moderating leadership and entrepreneurship forums online. Johnathan, thank you so much. It's so good to have you back with us today.
Great to be here. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Great. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My apologies in advance. Like Layla mentioned, I am traveling on business in San Antonio, so I am using the hotel Wi-Fi, so you all understand that sometimes it works, and now it is, and sometimes it doesn't. So hopefully the Wi-Fi gods will be with us.
Yeah.
All right, let's get started now. So today's presentation is on CMMC, the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification 2.0 standard. You may or may not be aware, but November 4th of last year, 2021, the Department of Defense changed a bit CMMC. Before we were working on the CMMC 1.2 edition, if you will, but they've gone to industry and they've made some changes to it. So now it's called CMMC 2.0. So we're going to go over what those changes are and how your organization can prepare I think a lot of you are going to be very happy with some of the changes that occurred as opposed to what the old CMMC standard was. And Layla, can we go to the next slide? So why did they make the changes? So like I said earlier, Department of Defense changed CMMC program back on November 4th, 2021. I will always remember the date the changes happened because it actually happened on my birthday. So I actually was, instead of celebrating my birthday, I had to go through all these changes instead. And the reasons they made some was they wanted to reduce some insecurities with the DoD supply chain. This was not different. If you think about CMMC, its reason for being there was because DoD saw there was an issue with its supply chain and getting products and services delivered to them. But when the 1 point standards were very big, if you will, and they did accomplish the goal. However, they were a bit difficult. If you started down the path of trying to get CMMC 1.2, for instance, you know how arduous it was, and they received a lot of input from industry, from consultants, from even internal to DoD, that it was a bit arduous. So they wanted to make it a little easier without sacrificing the quality that they were looking for. Also, the process was a bit, I don't want to say wonky, but it was a bit convoluted for getting certified. So they wanted to streamline that instead of having to go through the different hoops and different areas, especially we worked with the CMMC AB, they wanted to make it a little easier for them. So there were some things that were streamlined and taken out, if you will, or sped up to assist with getting people there. And also they wanted to change the way things were done a little bit. We'll go over these precise changes in a minute, but there were certain things that were being asked for that they determined that, you know, maybe we don't really need to ask all of that or ask for those certain things. So Layla, can we go to the next slide, please? All right, so CMMC Model Certification 2.0. It still has the same 5 basic principles. They wanted to safeguard their information to ensure that it was secure. And we're talking about CUI and FCI information, and also to make sure that only the people who needed to work with it had access to it. Also, they needed to enhance. So they wanted to be able to allow organizations to adapt their cybersecurity for the changing threats that we're seeing. For instance, you've noticed in recent news, more ransomware attacks and other malware attacks are occurring as opposed to just viruses coming in. And they wanted to give opportunities for the organizations to be able to make the changes that they needed to make to keep their cybersecurity environment safe, while at the same time being able to report this back to DoD so that they would know that the contractors, prime and subs, were doing what they needed to do to stay safe. Also to ensure accountability with minimal barriers. The old standard, there was a reporting, well, I should say a draft reporting requirement, except it went through so many different levels that by the time DoD sometimes would get word that there was a possible breach or there was a breach, it was a bit longer. So they said, you know, we need to make it a little faster so that notifications can get to them. Also, they wanted to enable companies, your company, to have a culture of cybersecurity and contribute to DoD's more collaborative environment. So CMMC, if you remember, one of the basic tenets was about reporting. So when there was a breach or there was a possible breach, having a mechanism in place so that the rest of the DIB would be familiar with it and know, okay, these are things happening, so that the entire community, if you will, could benefit. While also they wanted to maintain their high professional and ethical standards. If you work with DoD, you know that their ethics and professionalism is a core to working with them, and they wanted to make sure that the CMMC program also aligned with those tenets. Can you go to the next slide, Layla? So on CMMC 1.1, there were 5 levels of CMMC, you may recall, right? We had level 1, that was a very basic one. It was meant for FCI only. Once you've achieved the level 1, you were then cleared to be able to handle FCI contracts or FCI information that came out of contracts. There was also at level 2, they called it the intermediate transition level. You still were only able to handle FCI with that, but they wanted to put a step in there to show that you're progressing from just doing basic work and you're getting more towards looking at doing CUI. Then you had your level 3, which I consider good. To achieve that enabled you to have access to CUI, or controlled unclassified information. Then there was another transition level called level 4, which was proactive transition, where you were still working with CUI. However, it had a little more controls and standards around it. So you would work towards that with the ultimate goal for some companies of getting to your level 5, which was the advanced. And these were programs that were able to handle what they called CUI critical type projects. All right, so that was the old system. We had 5 levels. Layla, can we go to the next slide? With CMC level 2, there's only 3. Yay. So we have level 1 still, which they're still calling basic or foundational level. This one has 17 practices to it. However, with the level 1, you don't need to have a C3PAO or a certified third-party assessment organization come in. This can be done through a self-assessment. Now, this is a very interesting thing, because the self-assessment they're talking about is actually the NIST 800-171 standard. So if you are familiar with that, you'll know with NIST 800-171, you had to do a self-attestation where you would simply go through it, check off everything, make sure everything was in line. You created a letter and you updated it to the SPURS system, the supplier procurement response system. But you had to submit that, and once you did that, that was enabled you to check off that DFAR requirement that you had reported your score, if you will, to it. Basically, that's what level 1 is now. They've gone back to the NIST 800-171, and they want you to, assess your organization and then have somebody sign it. We're going to talk more about who's signing and who they're wanting, and a little bit about why that is. But just so you'll know, they're looking for an executive or even a board member of the organization to sign that self-attestation letter. The next level they now have is level, you can go, okay. The next level they have is level 2. So the old level 2, you remember I told you that was a transition level. That transition level is gone. The current level 2 equals the old level 3. So again, it's advanced. Now, instead of just having 17 practices, you're going to have 117 practices. Again, looking at NIST 800-171. But also, to achieve this level, it gets a little different. They have what are called bifurcated requirements or reporting. What that means is you can get a level 2, and depending on the project or the contract you're going for, you may be able to do a self-attestation again. Right, so just say, hey, look, we've gone through NIST 800-171. We've done the 110 practices, and you can have somebody, again, an executive or a board member, sign a letter, submit it to SPURS, and you'll be able to say we are level 2. The other side of it is the bifurcated side is now you can also, depending on the contract that you're bidding on, they may require, instead of a self-attestation, they may put wording in there that says, okay, you're going to need to have a certifying third-party organization come in and evaluate you in order to be able to claim level 2. All right, so keep that in mind. There's 2 pathways. They haven't identified what contracts specifically will require level 2 self-attestation, or which ones will require level 2 C3PAO inspection. That I'm predicting we're going to get some more guidance on that, but you'll see it in the RFPs that are going to come out that'll say whether or not a self-attestation of level 2 is needed, or if you're going to need the C3PAO. There's something else with that level 2. Oh, the other thing about level 2 is handling this type of information. This is when you're getting into CUI, right? And they have this thing when they're talking about critical projects, and it's going to be very interesting, again, when they give us more guidance to tell us what is the definition of a critical project as opposed to a non-critical project. They're both going to handle CUI, but how are you going to know? So again, there's nothing out yet. They did tell us they're working on that, and we should have it in a few months. The requirement came out November 4th, and now you can see we're in January. I haven't seen anything yet. So I don't know if it's going to be this quarter or maybe next quarter we'll start seeing that. And the final new level now is level 3. The level 3 is the expert. This is what I call this. This is like the old level 5. For this one, again, there's 110 practices are coming from NIST 800-171, as well as I want to say it's NIST 853, I believe it is. I can't remember exactly off the top of my head, but they're actually getting additional requirements, making it a lot more stringent. Now, to get this one, however, this one is not going to be a self-attestation, nor will it be done by a certified third-party assessment organization. This will be done by the government itself, by DoD themselves will come in and do the inspection to vet a company at the level 3 standard areas. So you'll see we went from 5 levels to 3 levels. I'm happy about this personally because, you know, the old level 2 and the old level 4, in my opinion, they were a bit of a joke because there was no inspection for them. They were, I mean, there was really no guidance like, okay, well, if I'm a level 1 and I start doing more work and I want to get my level 2 in the old days, there wasn't even an inspection guide. I could tell you this from being an RPO. There was no guidance on, well, how are you going to even conduct that thing? So I always looked at level 2 and level 4, even though they call them transitional, like they're kind of a waste because there's a lot of confusion around them. So to see that they dropped those 2 levels and they've brought us levels 1, 2, and 3 instead, I think is a great asset and a great change to the process. Look, can we go to the next slide? All right, so how is this going to affect your business? You know, on the slide, I have a bullet point, pick your battles wisely. When you look at the current level 1, and I told you before that could be accomplished with a self-attestation, basically you're running through NIST 800-171 and get that letter done, you submit it to SPURS, and, you know, Omni Dominus, you are level 1. However, the other thing that I didn't mention was the old system, they did not require POA&Ms, plan of action and milestones, right? You had to have everything perfect, basically, and then you wouldn't get it done. Now, however, they do allow POA&Ms. So you could submit a SPUR with a report to SPUR with your score, and you could also submit your poem, and that is acceptable. This gives the organizations a lot more flexibility in what areas are they going to work on. And instead of the old way where it was basically everything had to be done, now they have a little more flexibility. Now, they haven't put out any guidance, but I suspect, as the rest of the community does, they are going to start putting out some guidance about what standards or practices you're not going to be able to put a POA&M out about, right? So they may say, you know, this practice, I'm not going to say one in particular because I don't want anybody to think that that's what they said, but they may say this particular practice, no POA&Ms are allowed. You're going to have to actually do that in order to submit to SPURS and be able to call yourselves level 1. So keep an eye out for that. And when you start seeing those, that's going to help you, again, pick your battle of, all right, we got to make sure we get this standard or this practice done first. And then maybe this other one, it's not on that list, we can maybe delay on that. Also, be prepared for additional changes. Right now, the CMMC 2.0 is going through its the process of becoming standard, if you will. That means they're going to go back to industry, lawmakers are going to get involved, and they're going to look it over and everything. So there may be additional changes coming as it goes through that process and all. You should also keep in mind the spirit of CMMC from even the first iteration of constantly monitoring and improving your cybersecurity. You know, cybersecurity in today's world is not a one and done thing, right? We did it, we're done. Let's move on to the next thing. Cybersecurity is always changing. There are always new threats. There's always new issues that come up. Your organization should be, you know, kind of like on a three-legged stool, keeping up with all those changes and everything else. Keep in mind that although they may have changed the language and the processes, the expectations still remain the same. Yes, we went from 5 levels to 3 levels, and it sounds like, oh, wow, it got easier. We can do self-attestation now, yay. Don't think that, oh, well, DoD doesn't care. They do, they care even more so and all. And my next bullet point I put out there because it ties back to that self-attestation thing. One thing, what was this? Somebody has a question? Can we get the question later
It's,
on?
yeah, we'll do it after. Don't worry.
There's strong False Claims Act in the Cmmc 2.0 standard, okay? This is very interesting, and this is something I would encourage you, do not ignore what they're saying. They're not just saying this to say it. It's some other things have occurred. If you are aware, back last year, I believe it was, the Department of Defense did stand up their cyber department. And that department, and this is DOJ, this is not DOD, it's DOJ, set up this department, and this department was about cyber crimes. I found it very interesting that that was stood up, and it does a lot more to it. But one of the things that they are tasked with is pursuing false claims under the False Claims Act. If you're not familiar with the False Claims Act, it's not new. It's been around since the Civil War, 1865. And it got its origin after the Civil War. The US government started receiving a lot of invoices from people and companies saying, hey, you owe us money. For instance, I'm a pig farmer, and the Union Army came through and I gave them 6 pigs and I never got reimbursed for that. Well, they got those claims and the government would pay them. Well, they also investigated and they discovered that, hey, Johnathan, you were nowhere near that battle. You did not supply pigs to the US Army. You've submitted us a false invoice, right? So that's where the origin of False Claims Act comes from. Through the years, it's been edited. I believe the last time it was edited was back in 1985. But basically, the False Claim Act says, if you submit an invoice or you make a false statement in a project or a contract that we award, we can go after you. All right. Now let's think about Cmmc 2.0. And remember, I told you about the self-attestation. One of the problems that came up with when they announced the self-attestation thing is everybody says, oh my gosh, we went away from 800-171 because companies were submitting these statements saying, oh yeah, we're perfect. We got a perfect score and we're doing everything. And that was not true. In fact, there were some cases that, if you go back and you take a look at like it may have been a hack, you look at the forensics of it, you're like, well, wait a second. You said that you were perfect. You did everything under 800-171. You have that letter here, yet this hack says, clearly you weren't doing it because you wouldn't have gone through. For instance, one of the hacks was somebody used a shared password, where in 800-171 says, no, we don't have shared passwords. Well, how did the hacker get in there? So when they did that, so when they started talking about Cmmc 2.0 and they said the self-attestation thing, right after they started talking about False Claims Act, they didn't put the pieces together outright, but there was enough inference to me to be able to say, oh my gosh, they're really going to be looking at those SPURS statements. And if there is something that does occur, they may go talk to, you may end up having a visit from the DOJ in there. Do not ignore that the False Claims Act language you start hearing in this, because it was very coincidental how during the Cmmc 2.0, that language kept coming up and up and up again. Also, Cmmc now more closely aligns with 800-171. I didn't want to bore you all with all of the details, but one of the things that they did do was, if you remember in Cmmc 1.0, you had those custom practices that they just put in there. They took those out. So those are all gone. And now basically it's just 800-171. So again, they're aligning it more closely with 800-171 than it was before. Okay. Next slide, Layla. All right. Should I still use a registered provider organization? One of the things that came up, if you remember Cmmc 1.0, a lot of companies were reaching out to companies like Symbiont because we are registered provider organizations, to assist them getting ready for CMMC. Because like I said, before it was pretty much when that C3PO was going to come in, the way it was designed, you had to be perfect in all areas, because you only had 3 areas. Either you met, you didn't meet, or it wasn't observed. So you didn't want to have this C3PO come in that you would pay, right? And then discover that you didn't make it because you missed things. Well, now with the self-attestation, there is no C3PAO for a level 1. And also, depending on the bifurcated standards, you possibly don't even need one for a level 2, right? Because level 2 does allow self-attestation for certain projects or contracts and all. So now the question comes, well, gee, if we can do our own self-attestation, why do we need to use an RPO? And there's several reasons, I would say. Number one, an unbiased perspective. I used to work in corporate with companies who used to do these things, and I can tell you, when you're in IT, we get blinders. Sometimes we don't do it intentionally, but we're like, oh yeah, we're doing that. I remembered we had a discussion about that a week ago, or 2 months ago, or 2 years ago. Except we don't really investigate a lot because we kind of it's our environment. We know our environment. So it's good to have an RPO to come in because we don't know your environment. We're able to look at the standard and say, okay, let's work with you to see where you may have missed something, if all, or maybe even had misdefined something and all. Next, RPOs, this is what we do. We deal with Cmmc, we're dealing with NIST 800-171 along with other standards all the time. So it's not like, again, back when I was in corporate, I had a myriad of things of trying, as I used to say, keeping the trains running. So doing these type of standards or these assessments, it was like another thing on my plate. So I was basically like, just barreling through, let's just get this done. And really, did we understand it very well? A lot of times we did, certain areas and all, but again, that wasn't our primary focus, right? It was mainly keeping the systems running and keeping the company running and all. So again, having an RPO, again, that's all we do is we concentrate on these standards so we can walk in there and we'll know it a little better. And again, that ties to the next bullet point, because of our working with these all the time, we have an intimate familiarity with NIST 800-171. So we know some of the innuendos and some of the things that are a little fuzzy in them. If you ever read through the entire standard, there's some things that are kind of fuzzy and all. We are part of groups, so we discuss it with each other. We're actually able to go back to the NIST organization and ask questions, even DoD and all. Also, we can assist with making requirements and attaining timely and costly, effective solutions. I know, again, based on my experience, sometimes we're like, we just need to get it fixed, but we might bring in a software or a program or a process. Doesn't necessarily mean that was the best fit for us. Maybe it was because we're just trying to get something fixed, and later on down the road we're like, we should have done this instead. Again, having that third party come in, be able to say, okay, here's some options and lay it out much better and clearer, and here are the pros and the cons of them. That is very beneficial. At Symbiont, we actually work with companies. We're one of the reasons I'm in San Antonio. We help them create their cybersecurity processes, also maintain those programs for cybersecurity, and also be able to translate the different practices into CMMC. Some of them, if you read the standards, they can make doing regular business very arduous for an organization. You may have somebody in your accounting department like, oh my gosh, it's made my job 10 times harder. But we're able to come in and say, you know what? Maybe we can do an enclave, or maybe this operation, because they're not touching FCI or CUI, they don't really need to be involved with it. So here's how we can custom tailor, if you will, the program so that we're ensuring that the FCI, the CUI is maintained, but at the same time, we don't want to, make a big roadblock or a speed bump for the rest of the organization that it doesn't affect. Okay, Layla, the next question. All right, so what should I do next? There's this long list, and like Layla said, you all can get the, you're going to get the slides afterwards and it'll help you. But basically, certain things that, if you haven't started yet, first thing is do a contract inventory. Look at your contracts that you have, or even the ones that you're bidding on, hoping to get, and seeing, what kind of requirements, DFARS requirements are throwing in there and all. Right now, we're not seeing any CMMC requirements in any contracts currently because, like I said, it's under the review period and all. Next, you're going to identify the flow of CUI. So if you are going to be working with CUI, or you are working, well, where does it come into our system, and what happens to it? Who's touching it? How do we process it? How do we store it? And finally, ultimately, how do we destroy it? Getting that documented out. Once you're able to do that, then you're able to, conduct in this 800-171 preliminary assessment maybe, and figure out what are our gaps, where's things happening that don't align with that process and all. From there, you can develop what your POAM roadmap is going to look like. So like I said in an earlier slide, picking my battles, right? Which ones are we going to handle first? Which ones are going to handle second? And, what's our timeline going to be on that? One thing that I also will tell you from the mumblings, if you will, in the industry, is with the POAMs, it's not going to be sufficient just to say, oh, here's our plan of action, or what we want, or of us, alleviating this area. They're also going to be looking at, well, did you budget for it? So that's something else to think about too, is okay, so how much is it going to cost to do that, and putting a dollar sign next to it. So when you do have to submit that to the system, you're able to say, yes, it's on our timeline, and also it's on our budget line. So we are serious about getting this done. This is going to come in very important, I predict, because when contracting officers, for instance, when they start awarding contracts, they're going to be looking at your score, and they're going to be looking at your POAM, and they're going to be like, okay, which one is better? Are they actually going to be able to complete what we need when we need them, and things like that? And that might become a part of the assessment process. And it'll be very interesting to see when they put out the grading criteria on contract RFPs, if they start putting a line item in there saying, we're also going to be looking at, your timeline of correcting any deficiencies you might have. Next, make sure that you're submitting your NIST ASP 800-171 score to the SPURS database. This was something that was put out, I want to say it was fiscal year 2019, and you had to have it done by November 2020, if I remember correctly. A lot of you, if you've been around, you'll remember this. DoD came out with this thing that said, you must submit your 800-171 score by this date. A lot of organizations did, but a lot of organizations didn't. Now with Cmmc 2.0, don't be surprised if part of that assessment, they're going to say, we're actually going to be checking SPURS to make sure that you did submit, and that it's a current one, right? A current assessment as well. But there were some companies that did not submit a score. So you definitely going to want to make sure you get a score in there, because you don't want to lose out on an opportunity because they say, yeah, we looked in SPURS and we didn't see your certification. So we had to award it to the other person. Next, make sure that you are following your plan, right? You know what the old saying is, make a plan and follow the plan, right? Work that plan. So if you have your POA&M out there, or POAM, several of them might even, and you have gaps in there, it's not a matter of saying, oh, we submitted it. No, work it. You want to work out those gaps and make sure you're updating SPURS as you're doing your hitting your milestones and things like that. And finally, maintain effective cybersecurity risk and compliance management program. Like I said before in an earlier slide, CMMC is not a one and done thing. It's not like, okay, we got our level 1 or we got our level 2, we're good, let's move on. No, you're gonna always have to keep going back and reviewing it. Probably, or you should be on your policies and procedures, having a date on them, like, every so often, every so many years, we're going back and we're reviewing where we are, and we're making sure that we are staying in alignment. All right, Layla, the next slide. All right, so 4 main points that I hope you all take from this. Number 1, the purpose of CMMC remains, though there's been some major changes to it. The spirit of CMMC still is alive and strong. Number 2, we went from 5 levels to 3 levels. Number 3, I didn't talk about it too much, but the timeline moved up. Before, if you remember, they said that by 2026, CMMC requirements were going to be required on all projects. And if you saw my presentation, the 3-day presentation we gave last summer, I believe, I warned you about that, though. I said, yeah, it's going to be everybody by 2026, but by the time we get there, there's going to be over 1,000 contracts that are going to have CMMC requirements because they're part of that Pathfinder program. Some of y'all may remember that. Well, the Pathfinder program is gone. They've taken it away, done. No. What they have done now is said, okay, this is CMMC 2.0. We are now sending it through the process to get it approved. And they're predicting that it could take anywhere from 2 months to 24 months to get that final approval. So what does that mean? They submitted it November 2021, last year. So at the latest, 2 years later, we're looking around November 2023, CMMC 2.0 is going to be in all contracts, all right? So we've lost 3 years. All right, so if you haven't started now, now is a great time to start, as soon as possible. And it could drop at any minute. If it goes through the process very quickly, I mean, it could be, like I said, anywhere from 2 months to 24 months. And next thing you know, you'll start seeing them popping up in contracts and things like that. And the final point to remember is the False Claims Act. When you're doing those self-attestations, remember, they're requiring someone from the executive or board member to send in that letter. And each of you, I know we have a lot of business owners in here, you know what that means. That means that they're wanting somebody who has a fiduciary responsibility to the company to submit that. So draw from that what you will, why they said specifically they wanted those levels of people to be able to sign those letters before they get submitted. But remember the False Claims Act. Could be some very interesting headlines in the news, and I don't want any of you watching the presentation to be a subject of any of those headlines. Next slide, Layla. So how can Symbiont help? Provide understanding. NIST 800-171, there's a lot to it. It's not a matter, I've seen out on the internet, there are these Excel spreadsheets or these checklists, right? They have like all these lines in there, like, oh yeah, did you do this? Check. Well, 800-171 is a bit deeper than that, right? So you may have one line item for, let's say, access control 1.1, for instance. But when you open up that, there's actually sub checkoffs in there. So you have to be able to get all those sub checkoffs done to be able to check off that main title to say, okay, yes, we do now comply with that. So again, helping you to understand what those requirements are. We can assist with the risk. Big part of CMMC and NIST 800-171 is about identifying the risk. It's something that as business owners and executives and leaders, something we deal with on a daily basis, but being able to identify what are the risks to our organization and what are we willing to take on, or what are we saying, no, we got to get rid of that risk, or how can we, maybe partner with our insurance company to take on that risk, okay? And this is another thing to think about too. I've been in conversations with several insurance companies and talking about cybersecurity and getting cybersecurity insurance. And, Symbiont, back when we first got started back in 1985, there was no cybersecurity insurance. It wasn't needed and all. But over the years, it started changing. And I remember a few years ago when we were renewing our insurance, it had a little checkbox like, would you like to have cybersecurity insurance? I'm like, yeah, sure, check. And I think it was an additional $50 a month or something was added to our premium to do that. Now insurance companies are saying, okay, yeah, back then you just checked off the box, and we gave you cybersecurity insurance, which really wasn't much. It wasn't much of a threat. Now insurance companies are saying, we need to really look at organizations' cybersecurity before we can give them cybersecurity insurance. You all may have remembered the pipeline, what was the name of that company? I can't remember. Colonial Pipeline disaster we had last summer, I believe, right? Where they had ransomware and had to shut down the pipeline and oil stopped flowing and everything else. A lot of people don't know this, so I'll tell you the other side of the story. The ransom was paid. Actually, their insurance companies stepped up to the plate and they paid out the ransom, and that's how they were able to get back into running. However, the FBI and other agencies did step in and they were able to claw back the money. So they sent it out, the government got involved, the enforcement agencies got on, they were able to claw back some of that money and all. But this was a big, from my discussions, this was a big thing to insurance companies. They're like, wow, these claims were like, I think their ransomware was $10 million that the hackers wanted and all. That's a big risk that the insurance companies are taking to do that. And now that this is becoming almost the norm, these ransomware attacks and all, they are looking at their side of things and saying, hey, if companies are expecting us to be able to step in the breach, if you will, we need to see, what are you doing? And they are starting to look at things like standards. What framework, cybersecurity framework are you following now? It's no more just checking a box and saying, yeah, just give it to me. Now they're actually, I believe one of them actually said, we actually send insurance people from their organization or cybersecurity to actually assess organizations to ensure that they're doing what they should be doing before we can even approve them to get cybersecurity insurance, much less help determine what their premiums are going to be. So this is not just a DoD thing. We're starting to see, like I said in my presentation last summer, when it comes to security, DoD tends to be the tail that wags the dog. So whatever DoD does, it starts having an effect across the rest of the government. But also we're starting to see, even in the civilian world, it's starting to have an effect too. Also, we can assist you with help with making repeatable processes. A lot of times in cybersecurity, it's about having the right processes in place that work, are effective for your organization, and being able to just keep repeating those over and over again, right? You don't want to have an environment where Johnathan does it one way and Luna does it another way and Jim does it another way. No, that's not a good thing, right? So we actually help companies make those repeatable processes. But also, we do a lot of assessments and consulting with our clients, things like business processes, helping with that data flow mapping. It's amazing. You know, if you remember in the previous slide, I said, you know, looking at the life cycle, if you will, of CUI when it hits your organization, you know, how's it coming in? Where is it going? Who's touching it? How do you store it? And how do you destroy it? There were some gaps. So a lot of times organizations, they call us in to help them map that flow, if you will. We also help with the design and implementation of security practices, as well as remediation support. So a lot of times we'll do a gap analysis or a gap assessment, and organizations will come back and say, hey, this is great, but Johnathan, we don't have the staff, or we don't have the knowledge base to fix this, you know. So again, we can help with that remediation support. And finally, we can help with developing processes, policies, and technologies for you. I know that a lot of times with small and medium-sized businesses, contractors especially, you know, we're too busy running our business, you know, and cybersecurity is just another load of things to do. And, you know, you may not have the people in your wheelhouse or even access to those type of people to help you. Again, you can always reach out to Symbiont, and we can, you know, augment your team, if you will, and help you get up and running. And so you can make sure that side of the business is going while you still are able to concentrate on your main focus of this is what we really do for the government. All right, Layla. All right.
That is it.
Thank you for the question.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Let me see what questions that we have. The first one, ref, I don't know what that's short for, POAM, poems. I thought they were required under the previous version 1.0 and had to cover a plan to cover all shortfalls. Is it now the case that we don't have to have a poem at all? I'm confused.
Good. Hey, John, I think you get it flipped, right? So in version 1.0, poems were not allowed. They did not allow poems. It was basically you had to have everything done. With version 2.0, they now say we will allow poems. So I think you may be having a reverse there. But again, initially, no poems were accepted. It was actually written in the standard, like, we don't want your poems. You had to be perfect, if you will.
Thank you. Carrie has a question. If we get to the point where we are complying with the requirements and then we have to maintain it, what kind of cost for a third party to maintain it are we to expect?
Carrie, I'm not really sure. Again, Cmmc 2.0 right now is still in its review phase, and also we haven't had it released yet. However, just me thinking about it, once you've attained, let's say you've attained your Cmmc level 1 or 2, and you did the self-attestation and all, I would think that the only thing that you would need from somebody to maintain it would be somebody or an organization to keep up with any changes that may come down, right? So if there's any new practices that come up or requirements that happen or a new case happens and they're like, oh, we got to change this type of thing, that's what they would be doing, and maybe even helping you implement whatever changes might happen. But I would imagine that the cost should be minimal, right? Because the hardcore, the core of it all is just getting to the level. Once you have that done, and if you're reviewing your policies or your procedures on a regular basis, you know, as most organizations we do, right? I think here at Symbiont, some policies we review every 2 years, some we review every 1 year or 3 years. But the same thing is happening with your cybersecurity. But as long as you're keeping your core solid, anything about maintaining it after that should not be too taxing. So I would be very wary if an organization came to me and said, oh yeah, we can sign up for our subscription service for $30,000 a year, I'd be like, you know, but we already got everything. So why do I need that? You know?
Mhm. Okay, another question from Fred. We are seeing base access security applications for Army and Air Force locations identified by the contracting officers or the Corps as CUI. Won't this require you to meet level 2 standards to transmit and maintain this information?
So if you're seeing, and if it's being identified from locations, the Army or Air Force locations, one of the things that I would do is go directly to the contracting officer or the contracting officer's representative and asking that question. Again, the thing that's confused me, Fred, about that whole thing was bifurcated, right? So it's like, okay, some of them you're saying it could be self-attestation and some are going to require the C3PAO in there. And the only guidance we have right now, as I said, you know, they're going to identify them per contract, right? So at this point, that's about the only answer I could give you. I can't tell you, give you anything solid because again, we haven't, 2.0 hasn't actually been implemented yet.
Do you need to fully comply with NIST 800-171 for level 1?
You need to be able to comply to 17 practices, and they are broken out in the standard of what those are specifically. Now, if you remember when I talked about level two, it said this 800-171, but it went up to like 110 practices. So no, it's not like the whole thing. There are certain things that are not going to be required for a level 1 because you're only dealing with FCI, but there are some other differences that will be if you want to go higher and get to your level 2 for CUI.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Johnathan? It's always informative and enlightening to hear what you have to say and learn about these requirements as they change and grow. It's really great that things have gone from 5 to 3. I feel like that's a step in the right direction. Seems less overwhelming.
Yeah, the
you.
old way was very overwhelming, but 5, it was just
Too much.
even myself in there, I'm just like back then. But with the level 3, going down to 3 levels, I mean, like I said, a lot of the standards are still there and all, but it's a lot more digestible. It's a lot more
Yes.
and easier. I mean, some of those requirements, you know, for small and medium-sized businesses. I remember one comment at one conference I was at, they're like, are they trying to bankrupt small government contractors? Because this is crazy what they're asking. And all, everybody laughed, except I remember walking out of the room like, are they? You know, so with the CMC 2.0, I'm like, okay, good, they're not. Okay.
They've toned it down.
Yeah.
Well,
Right.
thank you, everyone. If there's any other questions for Johnathan, his contact information is here. I've got my contact information as well in the slides. So feel free to reach out to us at any time. We will be sending the slides and the recording most likely later this afternoon. Thank you all so much. We'll look forward to more webinars to come this year. Thanks, Johnathan.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Take care. Bye.